Hello and welcome to the Authentic Freedom Academy weekly spiritual service. I'm Lorianne Lumby, and we gather for these Friday afternoons at 1 o'clock Central Time. Friday afternoons, 1 o'clock Central Time. And so we're going to begin our service today, and the theme is Unraveling the Feminine Wound. Unraveling the feminine wound. And within that is also looking at the wounded masculine that has been part of our cultural experience. So before we begin, let's take a few moments in silence to center ourselves and bring ourselves into this circle. So I invite you to close your eyes. And take a few moments to draw your awareness to your breathing. To be conscious of each breath as you draw it in and as you give it release. As you draw it in and as you give it release. And as you are breathing and tending to that breath, be aware of how you are slowly and gently releasing your worries, any preoccupations or concerns that you might have at this time, any fears or anxieties that may be surfacing. And as you tend to that breathing, allowing yourself an opportunity to come into this space, come into this circle, and to acknowledge and recognize, perhaps even name, your personal reason and intention for being here today. And I want to offer a mantra for you to just spend a few moments repeating in your mind, holding it as a statement of intention, holding it as an acknowledgement of mission and purpose. And the mantra is, the stone which the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. The stone which the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. The stone which the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. And I invite us to all rest in silence for a few moments as we connect with that mantra. The stone which the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. And I invite you to listen to these words from the book of Revelation. A giant portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, with 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. She gave birth to a son, but her child was snatched away and taken to the heavens, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. And a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, the deceiver of the whole world, was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for eternity. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman, and to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opens its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children. I'm not exactly sure where to begin, as the message for today is complicated and yet simple at the same time. And it feels like a tangled bunch of yarn that we have to pull out one thread at a time to untangle that ball of yarn. And what we're untangling is this collective woundedness that is partly related to what I'm going to call, for lack of a better word, the feminine wounding, And in that feminine wounding also relates to the wounded or unholy masculine. And there's this bizarre, kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, did the wounded feminine cause the wounded masculine? Did the wounded masculine cause the wounded feminine? Whose fault is this? Why are we always at war with each other? And this is obviously more than about gender. This is about the feminine and the masculine within each of us. And as we have seen it lived out in human beings across time. Those that have gathered in the circle have found themselves here for a lot of different reasons, but I would say that probably the common thread has to do with either Mary Magdalene or something about Mary Magdalene or some other divine feminine energy that has brought us together in our roles of helping to support this transformation that our world is going through. And as we are in, I don't know, the sixth week or so of shutdown related to the COVID-19 virus, and we're looking in Wisconsin at least for another 6 weeks, we really have an opportunity to dive deep into our collective woundedness and begin to explore ways that we can support ourselves in our healing, and by supporting ourselves, being a model, an example, perhaps a teacher for others. And so I want to focus, I guess, the lesson or the message today on that feminine wounding. And to do that, I have to bring it back into the Mary Magdalene story. And for those that were raised in any sort of Christian tradition or simply were fortunate or unfortunate enough to be raised in a Western culture, there is this paradigm that has been with us for more than 2,000 years, 5,000 years or more. But I think the easiest one to touch on is this patriarchal fear, power, and control model that in the tradition that I was raised in has been grabbed onto, grasped, and solidified by the Catholic Christian Church as a misinterpretation of the Jesus message. And a big part of my ministry work has been to kind of restore the story of Mary Magdalene to that Christian narrative and to put her back in the proper place as Jesus's co-equal partner and the one to whom the mission was given to continue after Jesus's death. So that's been a big part of the work that I've been doing for many years. And to share a little bit about what has been unfolding in the past week, those that are gathering here in the circle know that I'm on like day 5 of a migraine headache and started on a level 10 on Monday. And I knew it was the universe saying deep dive, time to dive deep into something. And I didn't know what that something was until I took the dive. And what has come out of that something is a little show and tell. Let's see, all of these pages. Let's see, I think it starts somewhere around here. Was essentially Mary Magdalene speaking through me. or speaking through my pen. Now, like, I'm not a big fan of channeled writings. You know, I think that's a subjective art form. And I also think that the interpretation of quote unquote channeled messages is also subjective. So I'm not married to anything that came through in my writing. A lot of it was just specifically for me. But there was a lot of anger at the injustices that have been enacted upon women for the last 2,000 years specifically or more. Anger over the displacement of the feminine in the Jesus story, which then subsequently displaced women across Western culture for the last 2,000-ish years. Anger over dismissal, women being ignored, the gifts of women being denied, women not being cared for. And, you know, I probably don't need to go very in depth into that for those that are here to relate to that sense of not being heard, not being seen, devalued, discarded, betrayed, abandoned, condemned, criticized, all of those things. And when we look at the history of Western culture, how many times women have been killed for speaking, being, living in their power. So there was a lot of rage that came through in the writing. There was also a lot of grief, a lot of just deep soul grief over unfulfilled calling of the feminine soul. You know, as women, well, as human beings, we all have a deep soul calling. And I wrote down my definition of soul so I could remember to recite it properly. The way I understand soul is the uniquely creative way in which each of us has been gifted to find meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in our lives. And when engaged, leads us towards peace, contentment, joy, love, and finds its greatest fulfillment in service to the betterment of the world. Soul is what we are trying to birth through the process of discernment, and when the soul is fully birthed, we have become self-actualized. Every single human being has a soul calling, and that is unique for each and every one of us. That soul's calling is tangible and palpable, and we can feel it. We feel it as a sense of being compelled to explore or drawn into learning about something. We feel driven to pursue something. We are enraged when we feel thwarted in the fulfillment of our soul's calling. And as I sat in that reflection this week, there was a profound sense of grief over how many thousands of years that women's calling has not been able to be fulfilled. And I know that women are not the only ones whose callings have not been fulfilled. When we look at what is expected of men, or the, I call it the man code that is imposed upon men in Western culture. And that man code varies depending on, you know, your religion, your race, whatever culture you're growing up in. How many men have been able to fulfill their true soul's calling? So there's this deep woundedness around calling not being fulfilled, a deep woundedness around not being seen, not being heard, and a deep and profound grief that goes along with that. And I think it's very, well, I think we've all had the experience where um, we perhaps felt victimized by that cultural paradigm, where we felt thwarted, or as if um, there wasn't an ability for us to have our needs fulfilled. And that's appropriate, justified, and right when we are moving through our healing process and moving through that place of connecting with and trying to anchor and harness our true soul's calling and the inner power that supports that. So it's appropriate to have those kinds of experiences. And what this week's inner journey showed me, or I guess I should say reminded me of, is that we can get stuck in that place of victimhood. We can get stuck in the story. So for me personally, to bring it back to the Mary Magdalene story, there's been this ongoing theme of abandonment, loss, betrayal. Abandonment, loss, betrayal. Abandonment, loss, betrayal. And while there's truth in that, there was an opportunity. I was given an opportunity through the Mary Magdalene story to flip that paradigm. Because in my mind, Mary Magdalene was a victim of the patriarchal culture, a victim of the male disciples that refused to hear her, see her, listen to her, that didn't give her the proper place, a victim of an institution that for almost 2,000 years called her a prostitute and an adulterous woman and a whore. And so that was what was in my mind, and it made it easy for me to associate with that loss of a beloved, loss of purpose and mission, abandonment, and betrayal. And one of the things that came through in the journaling work, again, was an opportunity to flip that story and to look at our assumptions about Mary Magdalene, our assumptions about our own journey from a different lens. And in short, well, I'll read this part to you because I know I'm not going to say it right. Now, again, this is channeled writing. Take it with a grain of salt. Interpret it through your own lens, and maybe this is just for me and has nothing to do with anybody else in the world. But these are the words that came through. It wasn't about betrayal of the disciples. Instead, it was like God draping his protective cloak around us and secreting us away to a faraway place where we could freely and safely share the teaching, share and teach the truth of oneness. It wasn't about betrayal. Instead, it was like God wrapping his protective cloak around us and secreting us away to a faraway place where we could freely and safely share and teach the truth of oneness. So in the traditional interpretation of the Mary Magdalene story, it's Jesus died, she witnessed the resurrection, she went and told the disciples, they told her she was crazy and rejected everything that she said. And then they went off and did whatever the hell they wanted to do. And legends then say Mary left, went to Egypt, and then eventually went to France. So what if, instead of leaving in a huff, leaving out of a cloud of rejection, Mary, the feminine message, the feminine magic, the feminine power, was enfolded in a protective embrace that allowed it to develop and grow and be nurtured and cultivated and moving towards bearing fruit in a space that was safe from what might otherwise try to destroy it. What if that feminine message, that feminine power, that feminine truth was enfolded in a protective embrace so that it could develop and thrive on its own without the threat of that which might otherwise try to destroy it? And that's the message in that reading from Revelation. The woman clothed in the sun, standing on the moon, with a crown of stars on her head, was swept away to a safe and sacred space where she could live in her truth, be her truth, cultivate her truth, watch her truth thrive, and be protected from the violence and hatred and jealousy of what in the story is called the dragon. I think that's a profound message for us today as we gather in this circle and live in a world that has been oftentimes a struggle for women, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing how that feminine energy, that inner journey, the magical gifts of the feminine have been protected and shielded throughout the last 2,000 years. Whether it's in the ancient medicine traditions, or the herbalists, or the midwives, or the women that were healers in ancient times, whether it's the secret mystical traditions of the world's religions. And in Western culture, predominantly we're looking at Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and how there's this veiled, almost secret, feminine, inner, mystical tradition that is part of all of those cultures, and yet it hasn't been out and bold and loud. It's been hidden. And it's been available for those with eyes to see. It's been available when we ask the questions and the resources we need falls into our lap, but it's been hidden. And there's something really sacred and precious about that, in the sense that we had to go looking for it, and we readily found it because we asked the questions. And I feel as if we are moving into a time where these feminine gifts are going to be more readily acknowledged. People are going to be wanting and yearning and seeking after the wisdom that we have cultivated and developed within ourselves. And for all this time, it's been protected and guarded until the world was ready for it to emerge. Until the world was ready to accept that wisdom of the feminine, to accept that inner journey, to accept the work that we were talking about earlier, in the sense that if our world is going to continue to survive, we have to find a way to restore balance. And in order to restore that balance, we have to be accountable to ourselves. We have to be accountable to our wounds. We have to be accountable to the traumas that we've experienced in our lives. And we need tools to be able to be responsible to that for ourselves, so that our unhealed garbage isn't being spewed all over Facebook. So we're at this crossroad, I think, where that feminine is starting to come forward, and the world is going to start asking for that. And it's important for us to, I guess I'll say, be responsible to our own wounding around that feminine aspect, so that we can bring a more full expression of that into our sharing and into the fulfillment of our own gifts and our own mission. And it is this stone, this feminine wisdom, this feminine magic and power that was rejected. And now it's that feminine stone that will be the cornerstone on which the new world will be built. So the stone that was rejected will become the cornerstone. So I'm going to invite us into a few moments of silent reflection. And so I'm going to, cancel, sorry. So thank you to everyone for giving yourself time to reflect and to share what came through for you as insights and from your own personal experiences, from your own wisdom, and for really enriching this conversation around our own personal power, protecting that power, setting boundaries around that power, and really being in a place of personal accountability and responsible to ourselves for both our gifts and our wounds, and doing what we need to do to support the healing of one and the development of the other. So with that, I want to close with a card from, again, the Mother Mary Oracle. And this is the second day in a row I pulled this card, so I guess this is an important message. And I'm always fascinated as to how appropriate these are for our gatherings. So this is Our Lady of Promise. And this is her message to us today. I promise you new life. Whatever you release shall become sacred fertilizer for your new life. I promise that as you trust in me, I will guide you to the fulfillment of your heart's destiny. Do not shy away from what I ask of you. As you trust in me, I will lead you through fear and doubt, from fatigue and struggle, into boundless energy of compassion and passionate purpose. I promise you new life. Let me ignite the passionate fire of your sacred heart so that you can burn with love and bring light into the world. So thank you for being here today, and I enfold everybody in that protective, divine, secreting away energy where we can nestle and nest and nurture ourselves. And we will gather in this space again next Friday, 1 p.m. Central Time. And thank you. Namaste.